Hello everyone, welcome back to Toppr.com. So myself Pushpendu, I'm sure you must have seen me in various sessions. So we are conducting these live sessions which are very helpful for you. We have got a lot of feedback from you, so we are conducting these type of sessions. So today is a biology session, and we were supposed to do autonomic and peripheral nervous system. So what I decided that we are going to talk about an important part of this section. Here we are going to talk about reflexes, reflex arc, and very importantly nerve impulse, transmission of nerve impulse, right? So I'm sure you must have a brief idea about the neurons, right? Brief structural idea about neurons. So we are basically going to talk about how this neural transmission is happening in specifically human beings and most of the animals also, you can say, right? So before we start our class, I would like to say you that please subscribe to our YouTube channel. So we are conducting this type of sessions over various subjects, over various subjects and syllabuses. So it is very helpful for you. Invite your friends so that they can also be helped by these type of classes. So during the session, if you have any doubts, keep posting the doubts. I'll surely try to answer those questions, and if the time does not permit to answer all the questions here, you keep posting the questions, we can surely get back to you, right? So let's start today's session. So here, what I have said already, we will be mostly talking about few things: reflex action. We'll be concentrating on reflex arc, right? So basically we are concentrating over reflex, and also we are going to talk about nerve impulse. This nerve impulse part and this reflex action part is one of the most interesting part of the chapter, like neural control and coordination, right? So it is very important, it is very helpful for everyone, and it is actually one of the greatest creations of nature, I believe, because I'll try to justify you how this is very important. So let's start with our discussion. So before we get into actual reflex action, reflex arc, let us quickly revise about the nerves. Okay, so let's try to draw the structure of a neuron. Let's see how it looks like. So we know neuron, so it has a basic structure, right? I'm sure you know this structure, you're aware of this structure. I hope you can see it properly, right? So here is the basic, I'm trying to draw a very general outline. So here we have branches like this, correct? In addition to that, so what are these? What are these that I've drawn? These are called dendrites. Now, if I ask you what are the functions of these dendrites that I'm talking about, the dendrites, they help in receiving the signals from the adjacent neuron. Okay, so these are the endings. You can say this is one of the side endings which receives signals. So this is a cytoplasm, right? It contains granules. Okay, it contains granules which is known as Nissel's granules, and we have the nucleus over here. So this is the nucleus. This stem structure that we are seeing over here is called what? It's called the axon. Very important. So when we are talking about this section, so I'll be using these words. So आपको याद रखना चाहिए ये parts. So axon, dendrites, this is the nucleus. Let me write it down. Right, this is a stem and this is a nucleus. Again, what happens here, again we see some sort of branching over here. Okay, some sort of branching is seen over here, and there are certain bulb like structures. Okay, nodes or bulb, you can say. So this is actually called terminal axon. Okay, this is called what? Terminal axon. The neurons which we are talking about is mostly of two different types. This what I have drawn here, this is a non-myelinated neuron. So let me write it down. Non-myelinated neuron, right? Non-myelinated. Now, the other type is myelinated. Myelinated means what? So there are certain cells which are known as what? They are known as the Schwann cells. Okay, these are known as the Schwann, S-C-H-W-A-N-N, Schwann cells. These cells actually secrete certain structures or certain compounds which is deposited here. Okay, so it is deposited all over the axon stem. As you can see, I am drawing over here. So this is the myelin sheath, correct? This is known as myelin sheath. I'm sure you know about this. This is myelin sheath. So the neurons which has got this myelin sheath, they are known as the myelinated neurons. Whereas those which do not have these Schwann cell deposits, these are called non-myelinated neurons. Now, this is very important. Please take a look at this structure once more, because we are going to use this structure in order to understand how the transmission of neurons happen. Now, let's start an actual discussion with the reflex action. Okay, so we'll talk about the reflex action over here. So you understand, whatever is being transferred in this neuron, it is being transferred via this path. If I draw, if you ask me what is the exact pathway of the transmission of the impulse, it will be here as I am drawing. So very importantly, it is unidirectional. Unidirectional, correct? It is unidirectional. That means it will just travel in this direction only. Now, the important question is, the important question over here is that why it is unidirectional. I'll explain you as we go through this reflex action and nerve impulse, right? So again, if you have any questions, please keep posting. So we are going to talk about the impulse. So here we are saying that it is unidirectional, right? Now I'll explain you how this is unidirectional. So keep this drawing in mind. Okay, now let's move on to the actual part. Okay, so let's start our discussion with reflex action. So what do you mean by reflex action? Have you ever observed that we perform certain types of actions which we are not aware of? For example, if I just touch something very hot, what would happen? Do you think that I will have to actually give a thought that no, this is hot and I will have to remove my hand? Actually not. You'll see, whenever we touch something hot, we instantly remove our hand. So it's a fraction of second time is taken and we can perform that action. But it's a huge action, but it requires very less amount of time. So that is actually reflex action. Let's study how that happens. So basically, this is, we can say that these are the actions. There are certain action in which we do not need any intervention. Intervention of will. That means willingly you do not have to think about that situation. So आपको जानबूझ के समझना नहीं पड़ेगा कि वहां पे क्या हो रहा है, and you can act accordingly. So this is called, these are the certain actions. So let's study about them. So अब बात करते हैं मैकेनिज्म ऑफ रिफ्लेक्स एक्शन. ये रिफ्लेक्स एक्शन जो है, इसका मैकेनिज्म कैसा है, कैसे काम करता है. रिफ्लेक्स एक्शन का जो सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट पार्ट है, मोस्टली ये जो एक्शन के लिए जो सिग्नल जनरेट होता है वो मोस्टली स्पाइनल कॉर्ड से होता है. ओके, स्पाइनल कॉर्ड. नाउ अगर स्पाइनल कॉर्ड से आ रहा है, इन्हें कहते हैं स्पाइनल रिफ्लेक्स एक्शन. मोस्ट बुक्स, काफ़ी बुक्स में मोस्टली कहा जाता है कि रिफ्लेक्स आर्क हैपन्स ओनली इन स्पाइनल कॉर्ड, बट एक्चुअली इट्स अ बिट डिफरेंट. स्पाइनल कॉर्ड में मैक्सिमम चीज़ें होती है रिफ्लेक्स आर्क, बट in addition to that the brain is also involved. Okay, if the brain is involved, then what it is called? It is called as the cerebral reflex. Cerebral reflex, you understand? So दो type of reflex हो सकता है. अगर spinal cord involved है then it is called the spinal reflex action. अगर brain involved है it is called the cerebral reflex action, right? Now for what are the requirements for this reflex action? So let's just understand this. I have said about an example that if I touch something hot, I'm removing my hand. Let's break this action down into various parts. So I am touching something which is hot. So here heat, what is this? This is stimuli. So you can call it as stimulus. So this is the stimulus based on which certain action will be performed by our body. So this is the stimulus. Next, what happens? I touch it with my hand. That means there are some sensors. So my hand or my finger has some sensors. So this is the next requirement. So first we require a stimulus. Then we require a sensory part of our body. Then we require certain nerves which will carry this signal. So what is this? This heat or stimulus is a signal, nothing else, right? And our body can actually transmit signals and nothing else. There is no message that will be transferred saying that, yeah, this is heat. All these stimulus is converted into various types of electrical and chemical signals. Okay, you should keep this in mind. So there are certain nerves. Okay, so these nerves, they are called as the sensory nerves. Sensory nerves. So sensory nerves will carry the signal or the stimulus into the spinal cord mostly or the brain. So you understand, there is a stimulus there which is the heat. Then we have certain sensors, or we can call it as receptors, which are present mostly in our sense organs, right? We know there are 5 sense organs. So there are various receptors. Like I can tell you an example, like in our tongue there are various types of receptors, like the sweet that we can, if we have something sweet, that we are tasting that taste. How it is happening? Because of the presence of certain receptors over there, right? Now, so we have discussed about first 3 components. Next, what happens? Next we need the processing center. Processing center. So this processing center is the spinal cord. Okay, so the spinal cord is the processing center here. This is the 4th thing. Next, the spinal cord will process the signal and give some output. It's like a computer, you can consider it. So it gives certain signal. So this signal, or this is the action to the what? Stimulus. So the action that has to be taken by the body is being suggested by the processing center, which is the spinal cord. So that action is again in the form of what? It is again in the form of electrical or chemical signals. So it is the signals which is carried by certain types of nerves. Again, who will carry? The nerves will only carry, right? So यहाँ पे कौन से nerves हैं? So these nerves are called the motor nerves. So you have to understand the difference. The sensory nerves, they do what? They connect the sensory parts to the CNS, central nervous system. And the motor nerves connect the central nervous system to the effector organ. Now here comes the 6th part, which is the effector organ. Right? The effector organ. So what is the effector organ in my example? मेरे example में effector organ is the muscles of my hand. Okay, because I have touched something. If I touch something, I'll remove my hand. That means the muscles which is present in my hand, right? Those are the effector parts. So these are the 6 parts. There must be a stimulus, there must be a sensory organ or the receptor, there must be the nerves which will carry the signal or carry the stimulus. Those are known as the sensory nerves. Then we have a processing center, which is a spinal cord. Then we have the motor nerves, which will carry the action generated by the CNS. And there will be an effector organ, which will show the effect. So this whole thing which is happening can be represented as an arc. It is represented as an arc. So let me point it out. So here, this is the stimulus, number 1. I'm just writing the numbers. Then we have the sensory neurons. This is number 2. Here, let us draw the spinal cord like this. This is the spinal cord. So here we have, here we have 2. This is the heat. Here in the fingers, this will be the receptor. This will be 3rd, that the neurons which are transferring to the spinal cord. Here certain things will be happening. It will generate some signal, which will be 4. Now here this is 5. It will carry the action, and this is the effector organ. Correct? So this, you see, it's an arc. It's an arc. That's the reason it is also known as reflex arc. So reflex action or reflex arc. Now if I ask you, can you just name 1 or 2 reflex arc? Just take 1 minute and think about and try to think about certain reflex actions that you perform every day, and you'll be surprised to know that you're surprised because you even do not know that you're performing these type of actions. So just try to name, take 1 minute and try to name certain reflex actions. So I'm sure you must be thinking about certain actions. So I can name some. Blinking of eyes. So for example, if you're traveling and certain dust particle comes in your eyes, or if even someone blows in your eyes, you'll quickly blink. Why this is happening? This is nothing but a reflex arc. Do you think that you think before blinking? No. Even if you observe me carefully, while I'm talking, I'm blinking. I am not thinking that I have to blink, but it is happening. So these are certain actions which is happening. These are reflex actions, correct? So withdrawal of the limbs. If I touch something hot, then like if I hear some loud sound, we just do open our mouth, wow, right? If you're surprised, wow. So these are the actions. These are certain reflex actions. Correct? So you understood what are the reflex actions? You can try it at home. You can think of various types of reflex actions. Try to note down minimum 10 actions, and you see, you'll be surprised that you perform so many actions without even knowing, right? So this is not only case of human beings, it's the case for most of the animals, okay? They perform various types of actions. Now, there's an interesting fact that we perform certain actions even without knowing. There are certain stimulus, like heat, we know it is a stimulus, but think about the alimentary canal. Think about liver, it secretes bile. Think about alimentary canal, it is performing peristalsis. It performs peristalsis when there is a signal. Not all the time it will perform peristalsis. Now that means it is also a type of what? It is also a type of reflex action, but here we do not consciously know the stimulus. So you understand the difference? So there are some certain external stimuli which we come to know, which we understand and then react accordingly. Whereas there are certain internal stimulus which is constantly happening inside our body, जिसकी वजह से there are many actions happening inside our body. Okay. Now you understand, if I ask you what should be the importance of reflex action, reflex action is very important because of which we can save ourselves, we can act accordingly, because based on certain situations, based on certain conditions, we have to act accordingly, right? So reflex action is very important for us and all living organisms. So now if we talk about reflexes, okay, if we talk about reflex, so you have understood, I'm sure you have understood about reflex actions. Now if we talk about reflex, it can be of 2 types, unconditional, and the second will be conditional, of course. So let's try to define, quickly understand what do we mean by unconditional reflexes. These are reflexes which are transmitted through heredity. That means from birth you know these reflexes, like blinking of eyes. Okay, blinking of eyes, this you do not learn after your birth. It is happening inside your body. It happens in your body after birth, right from birth, in fact, right? If something is given to a baby in his mouth, in his or her mouth, what does that baby do? He or she swallows it. Do you think that anyone has ever taught that small baby to swallow, to understand, to make him understand what is swallowing? No, never, right? So this is a type of unconditional reflex. So these are inherited by us right from birth. So I'm sure you can understand what is conditional reflexes. So these are the reflexes which are acquired. That means we acquire these type of reflexes over our experience. When we experience something, then only these type of reflexes are acquired. Like a kid, you'll observe, if you observe a kid, he doesn't know what is cold or what is hot. For the first time when he touches something hot, you'll see he or she instantly does not remove his or her hand. Why? Because that type of stimulus is still unknown to the body. But the second time that kid encounters those type of reflexes or those type of stimuli, like anything sharp, anything cold, very cold, or anything hot, you'll see that same kid will remove his or her hand very quickly. So these are learned, you can say. These are conditional, that means learned or acquired reflexes. So these are mostly based on experiences, right, and based on conditions. Now there was a very important scientist named Pavlov. So I'll talk about a very interesting experiment conducted by a very important scientist, right? It's called, his name is Pavlov. Now, Pavlov in about 1906, right? He conducted an experiment. You know what he did? I'm sure you must have heard about in some stories. He had a pet dog. What he did was every time he gave that dog his food, what he did was he rang a bell. So he rang a bell, after that he gave that food. So he continuously did this for many days. So then what he observed, that you will observe that whenever food is there in front of a dog, you'll see his tongue, it comes out and saliva is secreted, right? It doesn't happen when there is no food. So what he did was, every time before giving the food, he rang the bell. He again rang the bell and gave the food, rang the bell, gave the food. So what happened? One fine day, after many days of this trial, what he did, he rang the bell, but he did not give the food. You know what happened? Interestingly, he observed that saliva was secreted by the tongue of the dog. Now why this happened? Because there was no food. The saliva should not have been secreted. You know what happened? This is a conditional reflex. So every time the dog actually got habituated that whenever the bell will ring, I'll get food. Whenever the bell will ring, the dog will get food. So he became habituated with that stimulus. So here stimulus is the sound of the bell. Now if he would have used a different type of sound, the same thing would not have happened. Here the sound is specific, that is the ringing of the bell. So here it proves that these are certain types of reflexes, right? Now let us talk about the most important part, and I feel this is one of the most interesting thing, which is we'll talk about is nerve impulse, right? Nerve impulse. So now you have seen about reflex action, and you know this is very fast, how this is happening, right? So I'll try to make you understand how this nerve impulse is transmitting or traveling, correct? Let's see. So if you would like to know about various books, of course NCERT is a very good book. you should follow that. In addition to that, the books which I like personally is like I follow Truman's, okay, Truman's Biology. You can have the objective book also and subjective book also. In addition to that, ABC of Biology is a very good book. You can go through it. So I'll suggest you first you should go through NCERT when you have a basic, then you move on to the detailed from any of these reference books, okay? So mostly like Truman's, ABC of Biology, so these are actually good books, right? So let's keep discussing. So nerve impulse. Now here I have already said you just at the start of this session that आपको वो structure याद रखना पड़ेगा, structure of the neuron. Now here we'll use this theory. Now what happens, there are certain experiments that has been conducted, there has been certain theories that has been proposed which suggest that there is a potential gradient across the membrane of the neuron. So let me draw the axon part. If I draw the axon part, let's imagine this is the axon part. So scientists said that this is the extracellular matrix, right? Extracellular. And this is intracellular. This is the inner part. So if this is the cell body, just let me draw it very rough. So if this is the internal part, so this is external part. It is said that there is a potential difference between these parts. So the charge on the outside of the membrane is different from the charge which is present inside the membrane. And it has been proved actually true. Let's discuss how this charge actually helps in transmission of the nerve impulse. This is very important and you should understand this. So now, first I'll just mention, here we are starting our discussion with non-myelinated neurons. So you should please keep this in mind that we are talking about the non-myelinated neurons. So here the first step which happens is called as polarization. Okay, polarization. So what is polarization? Now let's again draw the structure or the part of this neuron, part of the axon I have drawn about, right? So this is absolutely maintained all over the part of the neuron. So what happens is there is a lot of sodium ions outside the membrane and a lot of potassium ions inside the membrane. So you understand, a lot of sodium ions outside the membrane and a lot of potassium inside. Now, so ions, I should give the charge because I'm talking about ions. So potassium and sodium. Now there are certain pumps. So these are known as the sodium potassium pumps, right? Like, you know, a pump generates water, like a pump can throw out water. Similarly, these sodium and potassium pump can throw out these ions, right? So these pumps are used with the help of ATP because generally the generators, the pumps, they use certain energy, right? From mostly petrol, diesel, different type of energy is required. Here also the energy is required, and here we know the energy molecule is ATP. So ATP use करके यहाँ पे ये जो pump है, Na के जो pump है, sodium potassium pump, it is utilized. Now let's discuss क्या होता है. In the normal case, whenever there is no stimulus or whenever a neuron is not conducting any signal, what happens? During that case, the pumps, let me draw this as the pump. The pump will actually pump out constantly about 3 sodium ions outside and 2 potassium ions inside. So get it? So 3 sodium ions are pumped outside the membrane. So let me write it down here, outside, and this is inside, right? 3 sodium ions pumped outside, 2 potassium ions pumped inside. So what do you think? What should be the net charge across the membrane? The net charge across the membrane in this way is maintained as positive outside the membrane and negative inside the membrane. So you understand, if 3 charges are going outside, of course it should be positive. Compared to that, it is quite negative inside the membrane. So you now understand, because I have already said you that there's a potential gradient which is maintained over here, correct? So there's a potential gradient because of this, that the sodium potassium pump is pumping out 3 sodium ions outside, 2 potassium ions inside. So there's a gradient. This state is actually called the resting potential. Resting potential. This is the normal state for any type of neuron which is not conducting any impulse. So you understand? And why polarization? Because this is called the polarized state. So you understand? This is called the polarized state. Now happens the most interesting part. Once there is a signal, what happens? Let me draw it just beside this so that we can understand. We'll divide it into sections. So let us name this section of the neuron, these 3 sections. Okay, let's divide it into the neuron into 3 sections: section A, section B, and section C. So if there is a stimulus, of course it is coming through the dendrite into the cell body, and it will be transferred in through the neuron. What happens? Because of that stimulus, this membrane becomes freely permeable to sodium. Let me repeat. When there is a stimulus, obviously stimulus cannot be all over the neuron. It will be at a certain point. The point in which the stimulus is coming, it becomes freely permeable to sodium ions. That means what happens here? Sodium was outside, so sodium will come inside easily. This will change or reverse the charge. So in position A, it will become positive, and it will become negative outside and positive inside. Whereas the rest of the neuron will be positive outside and negative inside. So you understand? This is the part in which the signal has been received and something has changed. So this is actually known as depolarization, because we have already discussed what is the polarized state. This is the polarized state, and this part, since there is a stimulus, it is called depolarization. And this is resting potential. Because of this, it is called the action potential. You understand? Action potential. Why? Because यहाँ पे एक स्टिम्युलस आया है, उस स्टिम्युलस के वजह से जो रेस्टिंग पोटेंशियल था वो रिवर्स हो गया, एक एक्शन जनरेट हो गया, एक डिसिमिलरिटी हो गया अक्रॉस द मेम्ब्रेन. अब नाउ यू ट्राई टू अंडरस्टैंड. अभी यहाँ पे पॉजिटिव है, यहाँ पे नेगेटिव है, और यहाँ पे पॉजिटिव, यहाँ पे नेगेटिव. ऑफ कोर्स मूवमेंट होगा, क्योंकि वी नो these charges attract each other, positive negative charges attract each other. So क्या होगा? यहाँ से like this position, the charge will try to move here, and outside the charges will try to move in this direction. So you understand? So यहाँ से charge इधर आ जाएगा, और यहाँ से charge इस तरफ आएगा. So what will happen? This will result into the repolarization of section A, but depolarization of section B. You got it? So let me repeat. Section B will now become depolarized, whereas section A will now become repolarized. Why? Because the charge will be moving here. So similarly, in this way, the charge keeps on moving outside throughout this neuron. Now after B, C will be now depolarized, B will be repolarized. So this way the neuron transmits a signal. Okay. Now the time taken for the repolarization from here to here, right? Depolarization to repolarization is known as what? It is known as the refractory period. Refractory period. So you understand? कितना टाइम में depolarization से फिर से repolarization हो रहा है, इसे कहते हैं refractory period. Now मैं कुछ numbers देने वाला हूँ और you'll be surprised, I'm sure. For example, एक सेकेंड में, right, कितना डिस्टेंस एक नर्व इम्पल्स ट्रैवल कर सकता है? कैन यू इमेजिन? इट इज अबाउट 130 meters in human beings. So you understand, एक सेकेंड, just a tick, and 130 meters a signal can travel. So I'm sure अभी आपको समझ में आ रहा होगा कि how come we can react so fast in these type of stimulations, right? So this is how the nerve impulse is traveling in case of the non-myelinated sheath. So if you have understood this, you'll surely understand very easily what happens in the myelinated sheath. So in the myelinated sheath, what happens? The myelin sheath like this. You know what happens? So these deposits, in these areas actually, there are sodium potassium pumps. Otherwise, all the myelinated areas, they're isolated, and in fact they are insulated. That means they cannot react, or they do not have any reactions with the charges. Charges cannot affect these areas. So यहाँ पे जहाँ इस myelinated sheath नहीं है, these are called the nodes of Ranvier. You know, nodes of Ranvier पे ये पोटेशियम सोडियम पंप्स रहते हैं, जिसकी वजह से क्या होता है, जब भी यहाँ पे सिग्नल आएगा इस पोजीशन पे चार्जेस चेंज हो जाएंगे, इट विल क्रिएट डीपोलराइजेशन. नाउ यहाँ पे एक डिफरेंट चीज होता है, जो चेंजेस हो रहा है वो एनवायरमेंट से डायरेक्टली कैप्चर करते हैं नेक्स्ट नोड, वहां से डायरेक्टली कैप्चर करते हैं नेक्स्ट नोड. सो इसमें क्या हो रहा है, कंपेयर टू द प्रीवियस वन, हर एक पोजीशन पे all the positions do not need to be polarized, depolarized. It's just the nodes where the polarization and repolarization will happening. So because of this, nerve impulse can travel 50 times faster in case of myelinated sheath. And this type of transmission of impulse is called the saltatory transmission or conduction of nerve impulse, saltatory conduction of nerve impulse. So you understand क्या हुआ यहाँ पे? Because of myelinated sheath, ये जो nerve impulse है वो jump करता है. In fact, we can say these are the jumping signals. यहाँ पे इस node से jump करके next node पे चला जाता है, फिर next node, ऐसे करके पूरे जो area है, the signal do not need to travel all the positions over the axon, over the neuron. So this is much faster. It mostly happens with the environmental influences. So you understand, here in today's discussion we have talked about reflex, we have talked about what are the different reflex actions, we have talked about various examples of reflex actions, right? We have talked about how nerve impulse is transmitted in various actions. So in the next classes we are going to talk about the various forms of nerves. We are going to talk about synapse. Okay, we are going to talk about synapse. That means we have talked how a nerve impulse passes or travels through a neuron, but how it travels from one neuron to the next neuron. This we are going to talk about in our next live session, right? So I hope you have understood whatever we have discussed today. So as I have already mentioned, if you have doubts, we can quickly take a few questions over here, or else you can keep posting certain questions. So let me check if you have certain questions over here. Okay, so I have got a question about if we should prefer a single book or a couple of books. So as I've already mentioned that you should follow one book at a time, okay? Because most of the reference book, so I'll divide the books into two categories. First of all, NCERT, that gives you a basic knowledge. All the reference books if you take, they give you in-depth knowledge. So first follow NCERT, then one reference book. If you complete that, you can move on to next. Do not mix up all the books. Okay, so yes, if you're practicing one book, that is fine enough. What need to be for NEET, you have asked, right? For NEET, I will suggest it actually depends on how many number of questions you are solving, right? So practice one book, absolutely fine for that, but practice, take or buy various questions, okay? Set of questions. So you can, in fact, if you can subscribe to our channel, if you can just visit our website, you will get various types of questions over there and practice sessions, right? So I think I am sure you have enjoyed this session, right? So let's close this session for today. So we have talked about nerve impulse, we have talked about reflexes. I'm sure you have enjoyed this session. So please keep visiting toppr.com. For any doubts, you can get back to us. For any sessions, we are conducting various sessions. Keep visiting our website. Okay, so we are also doing a very important thing, like I just mentioned you. We are we are conducting various sessions with very renowned professors all over the country, right? You have to I'm sure you have heard about DC Pandey sir. So he has conducted a live session for us. You can just visit our channel, subscribe to that, and you will get to visit those sessions. And I'll suggest you please go and visit those sessions because it's very important. They are very renowned faculties. They have a lot of experiences. They have shared very important tips and tricks and very important suggestions for you. So go and visit them. It is there in the website, in our website, and in the YouTube channel. You can just go and visit. So you can just take a look over there anytime you want, right? So let's close this session for today. Thank you very much for joining us.